Hello? My name is Natalie. I am a student of English, and I want to tell you about my journey, how speaking English became my habit. At first, I was scared to talk, but something changed, and now I speak English every day without fear. I thought I had to be perfect to speak, but I was wrong. The secret was simple. I just had to start talking. Let me take you on my journey. The first time I tried to speak English to a stranger, my heart pounded so loudly that I could hear it in my ears. I was standing in a small coffee shop near my college, holding a $5 bill tightly in my sweaty hand. I had rehearsed the words in my mind over and over again. "One coffee, please." It was such a simple sentence, something a child could say without effort. But for me, it felt like climbing a tall mountain. As I stepped closer to the counter, I saw the barista, a young woman with a bright smile and a cheerful voice. "Good morning, what can I get for you?" she asked. My mind went blank. The words that I had practiced so many times disappeared. For a second, I thought about pointing at the menu and avoiding speaking altogether. But then, I took a deep breath and pushed myself. "One coffee, please," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. To my surprise, the barista didn't look confused. She didn't laugh at me or correct my pronunciation. She simply nodded and said, "Sure. Would you like cream or sugar?" That was an unexpected question. My confidence wavered again. I hesitated, then quickly nodded and said, "Yes." She waited for me to say more. Cream?" I added. The whole exchange lasted less than a minute, but when I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt as if I had won a battle. I had spoken English. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but I had done it. That day I realized something important. Speaking English was not about knowing every word. It was about trying. It was about opening my mouth and saying something, anything, after D. That first experience, I made it a rule to speak at least one sentence in English to a stranger every day. Sometimes it was as simple as saying "thank you" to a cashier or "nice weather today" to a neighbor. Other times, I tried a little more. One day I was in the grocery store standing in front of a shelf filled with different types of bread. A woman next to me was also looking at the bread, and I gathered my courage. "Which is best?" I asked, pointing at the loaves. The woman smiled and said, "Oh, I like this one. It's soft and fresh." That small conversation made me feel proud. I had asked a question. I had understood the answer. And most importantly, I had connected with someone using English. But not every attempt was easy. There were times when people didn't understand me right away. Sometimes I had to repeat myself. Once, I tried to ask a shopkeeper, "Where is the milk?" But my words came out mixed up, and he looked confused. I felt embarrassed, but I didn't give up. I tried again, this time pointing to a picture of milk on my phone. He smiled and pointed me in the right direction. That moment taught me that even if I made mistakes, people were willing to help. The biggest challenge came when I had to speak to someone who talked very fast. One day, I was in line at a food truck, and when it was my turn, the man taking orders spoke so quickly that I didn't understand a single word. I panicked. My mind froze. I could have walked away, but instead I said, "Can you say slowly?" The man smiled and repeated the question, this time slower. He was asking if I wanted my sandwich with or without cheese. I finally understood and answered. These small experiences day by day changed me. I went from being too scared to speak to feeling a little more confident. I realized that every time I spoke, I was learning something. I learned that people were patient. I learned that mistakes were okay. And most importantly, I learned that speaking English was not about knowing everything. It was about trying, even when it felt difficult. One evening I was sitting in the park watching people walk by. I saw an old man sitting on a bench, reading a newspaper. He looked kind, so I decided to challenge myself. I walked up to him and said, "Hello." He looked up, smiled, and replied, "Hello, young lady." That small moment gave me courage. I didn't have anything planned to say, but I took a deep breath and asked, "What are you reading?" The man chuckled and showed me his newspaper. "It's the local news. Are you learning English?" I nodded. "Yes, I try to talk more." He smiled warmly. "That's good. Keep practicing. Talking is the best way to learn." His words stayed with me. Talking is the best way to learn. That night I made a decision. I needed to practice even more. Speaking small sentences was helping me, but I wanted to get better, faster. I needed a partner, someone I could practice with every day, and that's when I thought of my friend Mia. After my small successes with strangers, I felt proud, but also frustrated. Speaking 1 or 2 sentences was a good start, but I knew it wasn't enough. I still hesitated, still struggled to find the right words, and my conversations ended too quickly. I needed more practice, real conversations, not just greetings or short questions. But how could I do that? I couldn't talk to strangers for too long without it becoming awkward. That's when I thought of Mia. She was my classmate, and one of the few people who knew I was trying to improve my English. Like me, she had been learning English for years, but she was also afraid to speak. I remembered a time in class when our teacher asked her a question in English, and she froze, turning red in the face. I had felt the same way before, so I understood her struggle. If I was scared to speak, and she was scared to speak, maybe we could help each other. The next day at school, I found Mia sitting alone in the library. I hesitated before walking up to her. What if she thought my idea was silly? But then I reminded myself, if I wanted to get better, I had to take risks. I sat down next to her and took a deep breath. "Mia, do you want to practice English with me?" She looked surprised at first. Then she smiled. "Practice? How?" I was nervous, but I explained my idea. "We only speak English, yes, to each other, every day." Mia hesitated. "But what if we make mistakes?" I nodded. "It's okay. No one will hear." She thought for a moment, then finally said, "Okay, let's try." At first it felt strange. We were both used to speaking in our native language, so switching to English was difficult. There were awkward silences. Sometimes we started a sentence and didn't know how to finish it. Other times we accidentally slipped back into our native language, only to quickly correct ourselves. But we didn't give up. We started small. During lunch breaks, we talked about simple things. "What you eat today?" I asked one day. Mia looked at her plate and thought for a moment. "I eat chicken and rice." I smiled. "Me too. It is good." It was a slow conversation, but it was progress. The next day, we talked a little more. "What you do after school?" Mia asked me. "I go home and study," I answered. Then I tried to ask her a question. "And you?" "I go to gym," she said, struggling with the sentence. "I like to exercise." We laughed at our broken English, but we kept going. Day by day, our sentences became longer. Our words came faster. We corrected each other gently. "No, not I go to gym. Say I go to the gym," I reminded her. She nodded. "Oh, okay. I go to the gym." It felt amazing to help each other, and because we were both learners, we never felt embarrassed. If Mia made a mistake, I didn't judge her, and when I made a mistake, she didn't judge me. After a few weeks, we decided to challenge ourselves. We set a rule: no speaking in our native language for 1 hour every day. At first, it was difficult. There were so many words we didn't know. Sometimes we had to use hand gestures or point to things to explain what we meant. But over time, it got easier. One day, while walking home together, we had our first real conversation in English without stopping. Mia said, "I want to buy a new dress." "Oh, for a party?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, my cousin. Wedding." I smiled. "That is exciting. What color you want?" "I think blue, but I don't know." "What style?" We continued talking, struggling a little but understanding each other. It was the first time I felt like I was truly communicating in English without fear. As weeks passed, we found more ways to make our practice fun. We played word games, described pictures in English, and even tried acting out short conversations like we were in a movie. One evening, while sitting in a cafe, Mia and I overheard a group of American tourists talking. Their English was fast, full of words we didn't know, but instead of feeling discouraged, we listened carefully. "I wish we can talk like them," Mia sighed. I took a deep breath. "Maybe one day we can." Then, suddenly, something crazy happened. One of the tourists accidentally dropped her scarf on the floor. Without thinking, I picked it up and said, "Excuse me, your scarf." The woman smiled and said, "Oh, thank you so much." I nodded, my heart racing. "You're welcome." It was a short moment, but it gave me confidence. If I could speak English to Mia every day, maybe I could speak to others too. That night, Mia and I made a new goal. We would find more people to talk to in English. It was time to take the next step, and that's when I decided to join an English-speaking group. Practicing with Mia every day had changed the way I felt about speaking English. I was no longer frozen with fear every time I had to say something. I had gotten used to making mistakes and trying again, but even though I was improving, I knew something was still missing. Mia and I spoke English to each other, but we both had the same struggles. We paused a lot, searched for words, and sometimes we used the wrong grammar without realizing it. I wanted to talk to people who spoke English more naturally, people who could help me improve even more. One afternoon, while waiting for the bus, I scrolled through my phone and searched for ways to practice English in real life. That's when I found something interesting, a local English conversation group. The description said, "Join us every Saturday for fun and friendly conversations in English." My heart started beating fast. This was exactly what I needed. But then fear crept into my mind. What if they are all better than me? I thought. What if I don't understand anything? I almost closed the page and forgot about it. But then I remembered the first time I had spoken to a stranger in English. I had been scared then too, but I had done it. And it had helped me grow. So I took a deep breath and signed up. The next Saturday, I stood outside a small cafe where the English conversation group was meeting. My hands were cold, and my stomach was full of nerves. Through the glass window, I saw a group of people sitting together, laughing and talking in English. I wanted to turn around and go home. I wasn't ready. I wasn't good enough. But then I thought about all the progress I had made. I had started with small sentences. I had practiced with Mia. This was the next step. I had to do this. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. A friendly-looking woman stood up and walked toward me. "Hi, are you here for the English conversation group?" she asked with a warm smile. I swallowed my fear and nodded. "Yes, I am. Natalie." "Welcome, Natalie. I'm Anna. Come join us," she said, leading me to the table. I sat down and looked around. There were about 8 people, all from different countries. Some spoke English very well, while others, like me, were still learning. Anna introduced me to the group, and then the conversation continued. At first, I just listened. The people around me spoke so naturally, using words and phrases I didn't know. I felt lost. I wanted to join in, but I didn't know how. Then Anna turned to me and asked, "Natalie, Tell us a little about yourself. Why do you want to improve your English? My heart pounded. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and spoke. I want to speak better English. I practice with my friend, but I need more. Anna smiled and nodded. That's great. You're in the right place. The others in the group were kind and patient. When I struggled to find words, they waited. When I made mistakes, they gently corrected me. And when I completed a sentence correctly, they encouraged me. Each week, we had a different topic to talk about. Sometimes it was simple, like, what do you like to do in your free time? Other times it was more challenging, like discussing news stories or sharing personal experiences. At first, I only gave short answers. I like reading. I go to gym. But slowly, I began to say more. One day, we talked about travel. One of the group members, Carlos, said, I once traveled to Italy. It was amazing. The food, the people, everything was great. I wanted to join the conversation. My mind searched for words. I thought about my own experience. I also like travel, I said. I went to beach last summer. Anna smiled. That's great. Which beach? I struggled to answer. It was big and beautiful. The water was blue. Carlos nodded. Sounds nice. Did you swim? Yes, I swim a lot. It was fun. I knew my sentences weren't perfect, but I was communicating. The conversation was flowing. I felt proud. Each week I got better. I learned to listen carefully and respond naturally. I noticed that native speakers didn't always use perfect grammar, and that made me feel less afraid of making mistakes. I also learned new words and phrases just by listening. One day, a group member said, "That's a piece of cake," and I looked at him, confused. He laughed and explained, "It means something is easy." I loved learning expressions like that. They made my English sound more natural. There were still times when I felt nervous, especially when I had to speak in front of the whole group. One evening, we had to share a short story from our life. I was so nervous that my hands shook. When it was my turn, I stood up and took a deep breath. I want to tell about my first time speaking English in a coffee shop. I told my story slowly and carefully. I made some mistakes, but no one laughed. They listened. They encouraged me, and when I finished, they clapped. I smiled. I had done it. After months of joining the group, I noticed a huge change in myself. I no longer hesitated before speaking. I started conversations without fear. I even made jokes in English. One evening, I realized something. I was no longer just learning English. I was living it. That night, as I walked home, I thought about my next goal. I had spoken to strangers. I had practiced with a friend. I had joined a group. But now, I wanted something more. I wanted to use English outside of practice. And that's when I decided to get a part-time job where I had to speak English every day. After months of practicing with Mia and joining the English-speaking group, my confidence had grown. I could have conversations. I could share my thoughts. I even joked with others in English. But despite all this, something still didn't feel right. Whenever I spoke English with Mia or in the group, I felt safe. They understood I was learning. They were patient. But out in the real world, I still hesitated. If I had to order food, ask for directions, or answer a question from a stranger, I froze. My mind would go blank. Words I had practiced so many times suddenly disappeared. One evening, after coming back from my English-speaking group, I walked into a small bakery near my house. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, and I saw a delicious-looking chocolate cake in the display case. I wanted to buy it, but when I reached the counter, my old fear returned. The cashier smiled. "Hi, what can I get for you?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My heart pounded. My brain screamed, Just say it. Just say, I want the chocolate cake. But my mouth refused to move. The cashier waited, looking slightly confused. Panicking, I pointed at the cake. That one, I mumbled. She nodded. Chocolate cake? I just nodded. I felt embarrassed. After all my practice, why couldn't I say a simple sentence? Walking home, I felt frustrated. I had spoken English so many times before. Why was it still so hard in real-life situations? I needed to fix this. I needed to feel comfortable speaking English anytime, anywhere. That's when I had an idea. What if I practiced with myself? That night, I stood in front of the mirror and tried to replay the bakery situation. I looked at my reflection and said, "Hi, I want the chocolate cake, please." It felt strange at first, talking to myself like that. But then, I said it again. "Hi, I want the chocolate cake, please." Then I pretended to be the cashier. I changed my voice slightly and said, "Sure. Do you want a small or large piece?" I switched back to my own voice. "A small piece, please." I went back and forth, playing both roles. It felt silly, but I noticed something. I wasn't nervous. There was no pressure. I wasn't afraid of making mistakes because no one was watching. The next day I tried again, but this time I practiced different situations. I stood in front of my mirror and imagined I was at a coffee shop. "Hi, can I get a cup of coffee?" Then I responded as the barista, "Sure, what size?" I answered myself, "A medium, please." I practiced ordering food, asking for directions, even making small talk with a stranger. I tried different sentences, played with my tone, and even worked on my facial expressions. Day by day, this practice became a habit. Soon, I wasn't just talking to myself in the mirror. I started talking to myself everywhere. While cooking, I described what I was doing. Now I'm chopping onions. The onions smell strong. Now I'm adding tomatoes to the pan. While walking to school, I talked about what I saw. The weather is nice today. The sky is blue. I see a dog crossing the street. Before bed, I reflected on my day in English. Today was a good day. I learned new words. I spoke to someone in English. At first, I spoke out loud when I was alone, but even in public, I whispered to myself or spoke in my head. If I saw something interesting, I described it in English in my mind. If I had a thought, I translated it into English. This constant practice helped in ways I never expected. One afternoon, I was in the park when I saw an old man struggling to pick up his fallen hat. Without thinking, I walked over and said, "Excuse me, sir, your hat." He smiled. "Oh, thank you, young lady." I realized something. I hadn't hesitated. I hadn't planned my words in advance. I had just spoken naturally. That evening, I tried something new. I walked into a grocery store and challenged myself to ask a question. Normally, I would just look around for what I needed, but this time, I approached a worker and asked, "Excuse me, where can I find the pasta?" The worker smiled and pointed to an aisle. "Aisle 5. "Thank you," I said and walked away, smiling. It was such a small conversation, but it made me feel powerful. Speaking English was no longer something I had to prepare for. It was becoming automatic. One evening, I sat in my room thinking about how far I had come. I remembered my first English conversation, where I could only say a few words. I remembered the fear I had at the bakery. But now I was having real conversations without fear. I still made mistakes. I still didn't know every word. But I had learned something important. Confidence in English wasn't just about knowing grammar or vocabulary. It was about feeling comfortable speaking, even when I wasn't perfect. One day, while sitting with Mia at lunch, I told her about my new method. "I talk to myself in English," I said. She laughed. "You talk alone?" "Yes. It helps." I smiled. "You should try." Mia looked thoughtful. "Maybe. I will." A week later, she told me, "I try your method. It helps." I talk about my day. I feel less scared now. I realized something. If this method had helped me and Mia, maybe it could help others too. Maybe there were many people like us, afraid to speak because they felt unprepared. That's when an idea formed in my mind. If speaking English to myself had given me confidence, maybe I could take it even further. Maybe it was time to challenge myself in a bigger way. That's when I decided to do something I had never done before. I would record myself speaking English and share it with others. After weeks of talking to myself in English, I felt stronger. I could form sentences faster. I didn't hesitate as much when speaking. But deep inside, I knew one thing. I was still practicing English. It wasn't yet a natural part of my life. I wanted to reach a point where English wasn't just something I was learning. I wanted it to be something I lived, something I used every day, not just during practice. That's when I asked myself an important question. What if I stop thinking of English as something separate from my life and start making it a part of everything I do? That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the ways I could surround myself with English. Not just by talking to myself, but by making English my normal language in everyday activities. And so, I made a plan. The first thing I did was change my phone settings. Instead of using my phone in my native language, I switched it to English. At first it felt strange. The words on the screen were different. I had to think a little harder when reading messages or setting alarms. But after a few days, I got used to it. Soon, English menus and notifications felt normal. Then, I changed the language of my social media. I followed English-speaking accounts, watched videos in English, and even changed my search settings so that more English content would appear. Whenever I wanted to look up something on the internet, I typed my question in English instead of my native language. Even the books I read changed. I had always loved reading, but I used to read in my first language. Now I picked up simple books in English. At first I had to stop and check new words often, but instead of getting frustrated, I reminded myself that this was a new way of thinking. One day, I picked up a book and read the first few pages without checking the dictionary. It wasn't perfect. I still didn't understand everything, but I got the main idea. That moment was exciting because I realized something important. I wasn't just practicing English anymore. I was thinking in it. The next step was to speak English more in daily life. I started small, at restaurants. Instead of pointing at the menu and saying, "This one," I made myself read out the name of the dish. At the grocery store, I practiced saying the names of different foods in my head. Apples, bananas, milk, eggs. When I saw a sign on the street, I read it out loud in English. At home, I started describing my actions in English. Now I'm making tea. I need to boil water first. I even started writing my to-do lists in English. My shopping lists, my reminders, my journal, all in English. One day, when I was helping my little brother with his schoolwork, I realized I was explaining something in English without thinking. I laughed and switched back to our native language, but at that moment, I knew. English was no longer just something I studied. It was becoming part of my daily life. After all these changes, I wanted to take it even further. I wanted to challenge myself to have longer conversations with English speakers. At first, I was nervous. What if I made a mistake? What if they didn't understand me? But then I reminded myself of something. I had come so far. I had already spoken to strangers, found a speaking buddy, joined a group, and even talked to myself to improve my fluency. This was just the next step. So I started small. I joined an online community for English learners where people helped each other practice. In chat groups, I started texting in English. Sometimes people corrected my mistakes, but I didn't feel bad. I felt grateful. Every correction meant I was improving. Then, I decided to take a bigger step. I joined a live conversation group on the internet. At first, I only listened. I heard people from different countries trying their best to speak English. Some spoke fluently. Some hesitated, just like me. But no one judged anyone. Finally, one day, I unmuted my microphone and said, "Hello, my name is Natalie. I am learning English and I want to improve my speaking." The people in the group welcomed me. They asked me simple questions and I answered. My sentences weren't perfect, but I kept going. By the end of the conversation, I felt proud. A few weeks later, I had a moment that changed everything. I was walking to school when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said. "Hi. Is this Natalie?" a voice asked. It was a customer service representative. I froze for a second. Usually, when I got calls in English, I felt nervous. But this time, I didn't feel that fear. Without even thinking, I responded, "Yes, speaking." The conversation continued. The person on the phone asked me questions, and I answered naturally. I wasn't translating in my head. I wasn't overthinking. I was just speaking. When the call ended, I stopped walking and smiled to myself. I had spoken English without fear, without hesitation, without preparation. That's when I realized something. English was no longer a subject I was learning. It was part of my life. Looking back, I saw how far I had come. From my first small conversations with strangers to practicing with Mia, to joining a group, to talking to myself, and now making English part of my daily life. But I also knew something else. My journey wasn't over. I still had so much to learn. I still wanted to get better. And that's the beautiful thing about learning a language. It never truly ends. So, if someone asked me, "How did you learn to speak English?" I would tell them this. I didn't just study English. I lived it. I made it part of my world, and you can too. And that's exactly what I will keep doing. Living in English. Learning every day and never stopping.